Welcome to Sunday Brunch.
The Magic ABC Transporter has dropped me on the North Shore. We're going to do Sunday Brunch with Professor Anna Reid, the new Dean at the Sydney Conservatorium, a butterfly door knocker, tucked way down in the bush. There is Professor Anna Reid. Simon, Marnie, how are you?
Oh, well, thanks, Simon.
Thank you for allowing us into your home for Sunday Brunch. What would you be doing? Oh, well, actually, you're in Budapest as we speak.
Well, as we speak, I am in Budapest, but normally I think I'd actually be playing music on Sunday morning, which is good for me because it's about the only time of the week I actually get to play it myself. So that's a typical Sunday morning for me.
If I look through there, I can see a couple of it. Can we go through to the music room? Because I can see a cello, a grand piano, and is that a harp of some sort?
Yes, that's a little harp, a little Celtic harp, and it's completely diatonic. And it was the first harp that my daughter played when she was 14, and my husband made it for her. And because we were new age-ish, she painted the front of it with Australian wildflowers.
So this is the music room, and your husband, he's a recorder player?
Oh, that's right. He was a professor of statistics, retired, and now he's entertaining himself by doing a master's of playing Baroque recorder. And he's been playing for 45 years, and so he's quite adept at it. So the house has got something like 70 different forms of recorders because, of course, you need a very specific recorder for every single piece of music you'd ever hope to play.
And where he's doing his master's, does he get on well with the new dean?
Yes, he gets on particularly well with the new dean. In fact, that's one of the curious things. I had to sign a statement saying that I was indeed having a relationship with one of the students. But as we have been married for some time, it was quite fun.
We're doing Sunday Brunch in the home of Professor Anna Reid. It's funny, last Sunday we were at another Conservatorium of Music alumni in the form of George Ellis.
Oh, great. George and I are old mates. We seem to follow each other around our careers, really. He was a desk behind me when we were students, but we're both cellists, and we seem to follow each other around Sydney all the time. He's a great mate, and now one of my students again.
That's right. But also, when you look at that time at the con, you had some fantastic fellow students there. I'm thinking of Richard Tognetti, Paul Dyer was there, Dimity Hall, and Catherine Selby.
Oh, yeah. Well, you've done your homework extremely well. Dimity and I were in exactly the same class.
Right.
And now I'm really pleased because her husband, Julian Smiles, is on my faculty and fabulous cellist. Again, I'm quite keen on cellists. Cathy Selby I've known for a long time. We're very good mates. Richard, I haven't really seen him for a long time, mostly because our paths just don't seem to cross. His music is very out there and avant-garde, and when I play, it tends to be early music.
And you're not a surfer either, so you won't see him on a wave.
But he probably knocks knees with my son, who's out there on a wave all the time.
Did you know at that time at the Conservatorium that these were people that would go on to be great musicians?
Well, actually, yes. The people that you've named all had an extraordinarily special spark about them. And you knew that something was going to happen. Each of them had a particular drive that they weren't going to let bureaucracy or mediocrity stand in their path at all. And they had a goal and a vision, and they've made it.
And when you look at the Conservatorium then, now, or even 100 years ago, possibly the method of teaching is very similar to 100 years ago, but the variety is dramatically different.
You've just put the words in my mouth. I think if Henry Verbruggen saw it, he'd be saying, my goodness, it's such a different place, but how wonderful. Yes, we still teach students who have that exceptional spark, and they still learn at a fantastic rate, phenomenal music ability. They're just great. And at the same time, we've really expanded what we can study in terms of music. So, for instance, thinking about music of different cultures, that's so important in contemporary society, but totally absent when it first started, except for Western art music, European traditions.
So they didn't do the shakuhachi in 1916?
I know, but we have a pretty good shakuhachi team of players and guzheng and all sorts of wonderful instruments now.
I'm thinking of your first year out of the con. You, first of all, write a piece for the opening of Parliament House with Heads Held High, but you also embark as head of a college. You must have been treading two different strands there, wondering whether you would be the composer, the practical musician, or the academic.
Well, actually, the two of them were totally related to each other. The commission came because of the school, and it was actually the day before Parliament House opened, and it was the most exceptional experience. I got to think of what story I wanted to tell about Australia, and so I spoke to some very important historians to try and get that story right. We started off the show with some fabulous Indigenous dancers, which I think was probably one of the first time this happened, particularly there, at that wonderful new site. It just came as a shock. I had not thought of myself as a composer at all. I thought of myself totally as a cellist. And when the challenge came up, I thought, oh, yeah, maybe I can do that. It was just about imagining how it is I wanted it to work. So the two ran hand in hand. But the biggest shock of all was that I was a young mother. So I remember writing the music on a coffee table in the middle of the night while the baby kind of slept.
And it must have been an awe-inspiring moment to see your work being performed in such a surround.
It was fantastic. I learnt so many things about direction, music, plot, politics. It was great.
On 702 ABC Sydney, ABC Radio across New South Wales, we're doing Sunday Brunch in the home of the new Dean of the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, Professor Anna Reid. Now the Dean of the Conservatorium, but really you've been acting Dean for some time.
Oh, I feel like I've always been acting Dean, really. It's just one of those enormously fortunate things, being in the right spot at the right time. So I happily acted in between 2 Deans ago and the ex one, and that was wonderful because I learnt so many things about the whole Conservatorium enterprise. So before that, I really knew about the curriculum. So I had a really good handle on that. But in that intervening time, budget, philanthropy, the professional staff, the way the concert platforms move, how the toilets drain. I learnt everything at that particular point, and then happily mentored the next dean in and then let him run his agenda. And then when he left, I've had a whole year of settling into really preparing for the job that I'm about to do.
But you've had a whole life immersing yourself in the way we learn music, particularly in a tertiary institution.
Yes, well, since that first unexpected job when I was only 22, music's been my thing. But it hasn't always been the total adventure either. So with the conclusion of my PhD, which was when I was about 35, it was about tertiary instrumental and vocal learning and pedagogy based at the Conservatorium. What I really loved at that point was how people learnt. I became totally hooked on what happened to enable people to understand something. And so hooked that I realised music was just one medium for it.
Does that mean that there will be changes at the Conservatorium under your steerage?
I guess that's a question everybody wants to hear an answer to, I guess. These things are already happening, and it's not just me. Everybody knows that in the 21st century there are different things that happen in our world that didn't happen previously. So if we just took the idea of technology, that has been a total game changer for learning. Whereas you used to have to be always with a person to learn something or with a book to learn something. Now you can switch on with all sorts of different technologies to find out what it is you need to know. So if I take an example of my son, who decided he was not going to be a musician because the whole of the rest of the family was. When he was 16, he suddenly decided he did want to be. And so I said, "What instrument, son?" And he said, "Well, the guitar I'd like." And he taught himself totally online. That was a real eye-opener for me. He did YouTube clips and he read tabs and he thought for himself and he played with his mates and he asked questions. And that's not actually what you should do at a conservatorium. At a conservatorium, we'd take people who've started this way. Conservatorium's job is to make sure that what they have is now a really sophisticated understanding of what they're doing rather than what they can just dip on from the internet. What we would take from his experience, though, is the peer learning element, that we acknowledge everybody learns from each other. So at the Conservatorium now, that's one of our big focuses, is that we get students to work with each other, we get them to use technologies, we use traditional forms because they're strong and stable, and we try innovative things.
But not just within the university or the Conservatorium itself, you're also branching out with the buddy system with other conservatoria.
Oh yes, all the way through the Conservatorium's life there have been people who've been really interested in musical outreach, making sure that students who live in regional areas or in disadvantaged areas have advantage to learn music some way or the other. One of the stalwarts of our program is David Miller, who every year has taken out what I call the Great Tours. He takes out groups of students to north, south and west, and that's been really good because it immediately embeds students with communities they haven't seen before and find out what the importance of music is. But taking from that idea, we now have a program that will be run always at the Conservatorium, which we've called up to now the Buddy Program, but soon it will change its name because we've got a donor now who's going to help us run this program in perpetuity. And this means that we can always have Conservatorium student presence in the regional conservatoires. And that means that we can support their programs in the way that they want. So, for instance, we can send out conductors when they need to develop their conducting. We can send out string players when they're trying to start a youth string orchestra. We can send out students to start a jazz program or to support that jazz program, or our music education people to work on early childhood music education. And it just will provide for the regionals a bit of support that will come to them instead of them having to always come to us.
That's going to be music to the ears of some of our regional listeners listening as we do Sunday Brunch in the home of Professor Anna Reid. I don't see anywhere around here a television or videos or DVDs.
No, we're not really keen on them. We started off 15 years ago noticing that our children were talking about the television all the time. So we thought that we'd ditch it. So we put the TV first of all into the garage, and then it became so small and so old-fashioned they didn't even bother anymore. And the tactic that we took was this. My husband was a refugee from Hungary. When he was at school, he also didn't have these advantages. So he gave the kids the tactic. When you go to school first in the morning, you listen to the first group of people talking about the show the night before. And then you can say in the next group, hey, this happened to that. Wasn't that groovy? And everybody else will go on with it. But then the kids in the end didn't notice it, and we didn't notice it. So now when we watch movies and things, it's a very specific attention that we decide, oh, we're going to watch such and such movie because we've heard about it, or such and such director because we like that, and we'll specifically get that movie probably on a DVD, and most often take it on holidays where the hotel room will have a DVD player.
So what would be the first movie?
Probably The Draftsman's Contract, Peter Greenaway's. That was an obsessive week away, actually. We had all of the Greenaway movies and we just watched them one after the other. So, but that was the best.
And the Nyman score through it?
Oh, absolutely. And it meant so much because Nyman was one of our guest composers for building up to our centenary years. So it was really lovely being able to listen to that and then listening to the Conservatorium choirs and orchestras play.
So the second film?
The second film is probably The Wrath of God, which is a Werner Herzog movie. And unfortunately, I think the third one is also going to be a Werner Herzog movie as well. But The Wrath of God is fantastic scenes where Aguirre, a Spanish conquistador, is traipsing through Andean jungle. And just the scenery that goes with that movie is just amazing, let alone the conquest story and how people managed with those conquests. Watching that movie prompted us all to go to Ecuador for Christmas. So we were seeing places that were similar to that movie, so that was really fabulous.
So I'm wondering what the third movie is, knowing that it's Herzog anyway.
Fitzcarraldo.
Ah, yes.
Yep.
So did you as a family go and carry a boat across a mountain?
Well, we looked at such mountains, but we did go on boats on water and imagined it. So we'd all seen it, and we all sang opera as we went on our canoe on the Amazon.
Because it's a great story of man versus nature.
Yeah, completely. The most amazing part of the movie was that they did it in real life. The local villagers all got together to move this boat from one side of the mountain to the other. So it stopped at that point being a scripted movie, but we were really watching people struggle with that particular issue. And that's great. I love watching things that help me understand people's struggle.
Fitzcarraldo, the third movie from on 702 ABC Sydney, ABC Radio across New South Wales, as we do Sunday Brunch in the home of Professor Anna Reid, the Dean of the Sydney Conservatorium of Music, from the album La Folia. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. The track is?
Fons Vitae.
Because when you look, not just the cello, but also the viola da gamba is one of your instruments. So I guess there's a hankering and a love for the Baroque old style of music as well.
Well, yes, but I'm kind of eclectic. I like nearly everything. Looking around my living room here, you can see sorts of different things. You probably can't see the viola da gambas. They're all put away because the weather is cold at the moment. And in this weather, the strings all break and they're made of gut. What I like about those instruments is that it's like painting on silk with ink. You can't make a mistake because the strings move and shift all the time. So you can't relax. It's a sort of playing you have to be right on the edge all the time, listening and adjusting, and the strings take a while to speak, so you've got to be really acute with your bow, and just the whole soundscape of that early music is really intriguing. I came to that kind of late. I was happily playing Bach and Mozart on modern instruments in my youth. It sounds fantastic. But when you play it all on matched old instruments, it's a different sound altogether.
Well, I'm thinking of the Brandenburg when you say that. Yeah. And one of the things that I've noticed is that you're keen for the Conservatorium to branch out and harness the energies of places like the Brandenburg, the ACO, the Australian Ballet Orchestra.
Oh, completely. We had a very productive meeting earlier this year in March where we pulled all of those guys together. And it was probably the first time we talked about what orchestral pedagogy might mean, because we all do different things. If I was coming from the Sydney Youth Orchestra, for instance, they service the young ones, very, very well, all the way through, their school career. Then they hit the Conservatorium. They're thinking they're going to be professionals. They need a different form of an education. So we wallop them, basically. They work really hard. Our chief conductor, Eduardo, he works very carefully with the orchestral program, thinking about how it is you can build students up to the big works. So there's a very careful pedagogy putting behind that. Sitting beyond that, we have all of our wonderful partners like the Brandenburgs, like the Australian Opera Ballet Orchestra, who have our students in as part of mentoring and internship programs and allow students to go to concerts and share with us their fabulous visitors that come. So we have a rich interplay, and we know now that there are things that we can do in our program that will better support students moving out into the profession. But more importantly, all of our industrial partners are thinking about what they can do to help students make that transitional leap from being a student into a professional player.
So when you took over and appointed properly, not acting dean, it was sort of the end of a quite tumultuous time in the Conservatorium's history, particularly the last 7 or 8 years.
Well, that's how the media has it, and there are certainly stories that can go with it. But I was there for pretty much, for the last 7 years. I've seen it all happen. And despite the leader, there's phenomenal music making that goes on inside. I can also say that's also because of the leaders that were there as well. Media says one thing, but the advantages that those leaders gave to the Conservatorium for setting directions have been fabulous as well. For instance, the conducting program. That was my predecessor back too, and she devised that program, and it's one of our strengths. It's absolutely fantastic. My immediate predecessor, the Estivo Festival in Italy, which focuses on chamber music students, another fabulous thing. So we take with us legacies from those periods, which is strong. But the most important thing is the quality of the students. They are carefully selected and they are amazing. And when you get a bunch of amazing people together, you can only hope for magic to happen. So despite tumult, the place is actually in a really good nick. The work that comes out of it is fantastic.
We're doing Sunday Brunch in the home of Professor Anna Reid from the Conservatorium of Music.